didn't work for me, and all of a sudden my imagination went wild, and within 6 months I had 480 pages done. You know, so this one is not 480 pages. Part of that is going into book number 2. But I wanted to introduce my daughter Erin and her husband Lou. They're here tonight. And it's kind of funny, the story goes, the term Banshee in Irish is spelled B-E-A-N, that's ban, and S-I-D-H-E is she, which means fairy. So the Banshee is a fairy woman. And when Erin was little, we called her Bean. I had no idea that Bean meant woman in Gaelic, but we called her Bean, and she really is a fairy woman. I mean, she is interesting, and she is all about it. So that, you know, was a delight for me. Just to get started tonight, one of my favorite authors is Neil Gaiman. You may know his work. He did American Gods. It's on HBO, I think, and you know, he's written a lot of things. He did The Good Omen, which is on Netflix, and he wrote a book on Norse mythology. And what he said in his acknowledgments, in his foreword, was that as a writer, we need to be reading mythology, because mythology is the stories of all of our beginnings, you know, and every nation, every group of people, they have their mythology of how things got started. And he said, and as a writer, it's important that we add to that mythology. And so Vinnie Hooligan is my attempt to add to Irish mythology. And just a real quick rundown, the Tuatha Dé Danann were the first inhabitants of Ireland according to Irish mythology. They were the fairies, okay? And they lived there for millennia, and it said that they brought all the grain and all the rivers and all the mountains, and they took care of the land, and they took care of everything in Ireland. And then the kings from the east and the west and the north and the south sent parties out, and Ireland was like a magnet to them. And so these men came into Ireland, and they began to tear up the soil and grow things, and they began to hunt and do all these things, and the fairies didn't like that. So they went to war, and they fought for about 100 years, and they came to a stalemate. And they decided to split Ireland in half. And you would think that they would say, okay, I'm going to go north and you're going to go south, or I'm going to go east and you're going to go west. But that's not what they did. They did what the Irish typically do. Man took the top and the Irish took the bottom. Yeah. Okay? And they say that the Irish, that the fairies still travel at night around Ireland, and they have their pathways. And they don't like men screwing with their pathways. And Eddie Linehan is the last Shanachie in Ireland right now, and he told this story about that. A couple hundred years ago, this little farmer builds he and his wife are living in a mud hut, and his wife said, I'm not living in this thing, and if you think I'm going to live in this mud hut for much longer, you're wrong. I'm going home, so go build me a house. So he goes out, and he lays out the foundation and decides that this is where he's going to build the house. Well, this little old geezer comes up in his horse and wagon, and he says, are you building your house there? And he said, yeah, what do you think I'm doing? And he goes, I don't think you want to do it. He said, off with you. This is where I'm building my house. So the guy builds the house, and they get everything moved in, and they're in their upstairs bedroom the first night, and all of a sudden they hear everything crashing down below. The plates and the glasses and all the furniture's turned upside down, and he goes down there and the house looks great, and he's wondering what the hell's going on here. So they go back to bed, and the same thing happens the next night. And so this happens for about 30 days, and finally this guy says, okay, I've had enough of this shit. I'm going down to the pub. I got to get some peace and quiet. So he gets down to the pub, and he runs into the little old man, and the little old man says, well, so how's everything going in the house? And he goes, not well. Things are crazy. He goes, I told you so. And he goes, well, what should I do about it? And he said, you put a door in the east side, and you put a door in the west side, and you don't lock them at night, and you're going to be grand. Because what are you talking about? He said, the fairies want to get through there. Never had a problem after that. So that's kind of a, in a nutshell, the story of Irish mythology. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Shanachie. The Shanachie is a critically important person in Irish history, not mythology, but Irish history. The Irish were the first people to record their history using surnames. The Jews were magnificent because, you can look at, Jesus's ancestry, and it goes from Abraham to David, and then from David to Jesus, and it's 32 generations, and they've got all the names and everything outlined, and it's exquisite, and they do it with their 12 tribes, right? Well, the Irish did the same thing, except what they would do is they would say, okay, you're going to be son of Connor, so you're O'Connor, and you're going to be the grandson of Carthy, so you're McCarthy. And so those names stuck as surnames. So the Shanachie would take and write down all of the Irish history for all the clans and all the different provinces and, the whole island. So a king would say, well, we fought these guys 50 years ago, what do we do now? And the Shanachie would go and look up in his records, and he would say, okay, well, this is what happened last time, and this didn't work, so do it the way this time. So he was like, a counselor to the king. So fast forward 1,000 years, and the English come in, and they take over Ireland, and they take the language, they outlaw the school, they outlaw everything that's Irish, everything that's Gaelic, everything that's Celtic. They tried to make it Anglo, and the Irish would have nothing to do with that. So the Shanachie morphed into this traveling storyteller. So it began the oral Irish tradition of telling stories. So they would go east and west, north and south, and they would tell their stories, and it depended on, where they were in the country and what clans that they were talking to, but that's what they would do. And so I wrote a little something that I want to share with you. I was thinking to myself, what would it be like to be a Shanachie? If I put myself in his shoes, and he's traveling around the country and he's doing his thing. And so I thought, I'm going to write that down. So this is what I wrote. I walk these lanes, byways and highways, north, south, east, and west. No destination in mind in particularly. Mostly I'm unnoticed until I'm not. I walk with the fairy wind at my back, the gate she. And she tells me where I'm going until I get there. I don't worry about what I'm to eat or what I'm to drink. My stories will take care of that until they don't. Last I counted, but who's counting? I've got 456 stories right up here. And if you tell me where you're from and you tell me who you are, I'll tell you really and truly where you're from and who you are. I have a walking stick that I walk with that was given to me by the fairies. It was taken from the root of their sacred hawthorn bush. I walk with her until I won't. I sleep until I don't. I live until I won't. And I breathe until I don't. But the sadness comes when I see the humiliation that they're experiencing from their oppressor. So that's when I stop at the hedgerow. And it's the little children who see me first, because the adults don't notice things. And the children cry out, "It's the Shanachie, the storyteller." And they come, and we sit cross-legged on the ground, and we hold hands. And they settle in little by little, because they know the magic's coming, the story's coming. And I tell them the fairy tales. Sans the fairy dust, thank you very much. And it's in that story, in that magic moment, that they'll never forget. And then on the air, I can smell the roast stew and the brown bread and the fresh butter. And I think to myself, I can't remember the last time I ate until I do. And then the kids stand up and they walk me into the village And the villagers all know I'm coming by now because they've built a bonfire. And they've churned some hay for me where I'll take my rest until I won't. And then I'm graciously invited in to eat my fill until I don't. And I'll drink some of the hard drink until I won't. And then I fill my pipe and I walk out. And the villagers are so sad. And there's such a heaviness on their shoulders. But they're anxious to see me. And I tell them my stories until I don't. And sometimes it lasts until the sun comes up and there's pink in the sky. And sometimes they nod off and sometimes they don't. But the saddest part is when the oppressor sends his soldiers in and breaks us up. Because it wasn't enough for him to take our land, to take our food, to take everything that we are. No, it wasn't enough. Because he knows for sure that the most dangerous man alive is the man who knows his past. Thanks. So that to me was, really what a Shawnee is. And if it wasn't for the Shawnee, Irish history would have been lost because the English wanted nothing to do with any of it. And these men continually did that until about the 1960s when, the radio and television became popular. And there's a couple of things that I did that I want to share with you. I talked about adding, my thing, my addition. Hey, Mike. My addition to the story, the mythology. And so what I did was, come on in. What I did was I created in the book the cap of inconspicuousness. Okay? Move over, cloak of invisibility. The Irish just showed up. All right. So in the story, Vinnie gets the cap, and I won't tell you much about it, but he can just tap the top of it, and all of a sudden, he's not invisible, he's just inconspicuous, okay? So I decided I had to have my own cap of inconspicuousness, and instead of going to John Ryan, my haberdasher, I ordered this cap from Hannah Caps in Donegal, all right? So the first cap comes, and some jackass stole it off my front porch. So my friend, Mike Sturvis, said, well, there's some jackass walking around Omaha thinking he's cool in a hat and no one's noticing. There
you go.
So that's the cap of inconspicuous. And now that you know what the Shawnee is, if you look on the back of the book, I created what they call the Shawnee window. And these four kids and Vinnie and Grandpa Hooligan, they go through the window to any time in Irish history. And so that it's just a literary device that I created so that you can tell the story, okay? So now I'm gonna read actually the first two chapters, but don't worry about it because this is my version of Netflix, okay, you guys? The thing is you gotta hit them and you gotta hit them and you gotta hit them and you gotta keep hitting them to get them to read, right? So that's what I wanted to do, and that's how I kind of write my books. And so this will be a quick read, and I promise you, you won't be bored. And this really doesn't give anything away. Okay, so it was Friday night in the heat of the summer when the Quinlan sisters, Kyle and Maureen, my best friends, called and asked if I wanted to go to a party. I jumped in my swim trunks, tennies, and a t-shirt and headed for the door. Whoa there, Ace, said my dad. Vincent Hooligan, front and center. Where are you off to in such a hurry? The Quinlans called and said, Jamie Miller's having a party. I'll be home by midnight. No later or you'll turn into a hobgoblin. The Quinlans lived 3 doors down and were waiting for me when I walked out the door. The party was a few blocks over and was in full swing when we arrived. We walked into the backyard where the Millers had an above-ground pool set into a redwood deck. I looked at the water and smiled. I loved the water. When I was little, my parents would take me to Grand Park on Lake Michigan. We set our place on the beach with towels, chairs, and a picnic basket, and we would swim in the lake. My parents were always amazed at how well I swam. Even though I had never taken a lesson, I would spend hours in the water. It got to the point where they wouldn't even worry about me. As a little kid, I never thought it odd how long I could go under and not come up for air. First, my parents would come looking, and I could hear them calling. I'd come up smiling. Those were the memories. Those were great memories. I took off my t-shirt and was going to jump in when Kyle Quinlan said, "Duffy McDufferton at 12 o'clock. I looked across the pool, and Duffy had Tommy Hurley in a headlock and was giving him a Dutch rub while telling a story to a gang of kids. When he got done, he tossed Tommy into the pool in his street clothes, and they all laughed, mostly these fake "I'm scared I'm next" laughs. That's when he spotted me. "What are you smiling at, Hooligan? Who was stupid enough to invite you? You want a little of what Hurley got? Here we go, girls. What was that, Hooligan?" He walked around the pool toward me, and the crowd went quiet. As a sophomore in high school, I was just finishing my latest growth spurt, and as tall as Duffy was, but he had me by 75 pounds. "Look, Duffy, I don't want any trouble. I just came to have fun." "Well, let's have some fun then." He went to grab me, but I was like an eel. I dodged his grip and ran for the pool and dove in. He followed me and was on me as soon as I surfaced. He put me in a headlock and held me under the water. I knew intuitively that holding me under the water was not going to be a problem, but I struggled with all my might to get away because I didn't like being humiliated and I hated this guy. But he was just too strong. I could hear him talking to the crowd, much like he had done with Tommy, telling a story while he held me under. "Duffy, let him up. He's going to drown," Maureen Quinlan said. "Screw off, Quinlan. God, you were such an asshat." The Quinlan sisters jumped in and started wailing on Duffy. By the time they were done, Duffy was bleeding from his lip and he had a black eye. He jumped from the pool and limped away. I watched all this comfortably from the bottom of the pool, as if I was relaxing in a poolside lounge chair, hands behind my head and smiling. They both dove to get me and saw me free from anxiety and smiling. They grabbed me and brought me to the surface. When we got there, I said under my breath, "I'll explain later what happened down there, but pretend to save me and give me mouth to mouth." "Not on your life, asshat. I'd let you drown first," Kyle said. "I'm throwing you on your stomach and slapping your back, and you pretend to cough up," Maureen said. "Yeah, and you've got a lot of explaining to do," Kyle added. They pulled me from the pool, laid me on my stomach, and pounded my back. I coughed up some water and rolled over. There next to Duffy stood the Savage Sisters. The Quinlans always had to defend themselves against the Savage Sisters, who were always on the prowl. Felina and Canina were a year apart, and Pavanina and Aquila were identical twins, and no one ever even thought of making fun of their names. That is, if they wanted to live very long. Kyle and Maureen stood and looked at them, and from where I was laying, it looked like they were itching for a fight. At least Kyle was clenching and unclenching her fist. "Nice look, girls. The drip. You wear it well," said Pavanina. "Maybe you can wear this, you little," Kyle replied. She went to take a swing when Maureen grabbed her arm. "Not here." Smart move, girls. 4 against 2 ain't great odds," Canina said. "I like my chances," Kyle said. Mrs. Miller walked up, helped me to my feet, and said, "That's it. You're out of here. Every time a hooligan shows up, there's trouble." Felina smiled at us and said, "You can say that again." And as I walked out, I said, "Hey, Duff, it was nice swimming with you." He flipped me off. I know the Quinlans enjoyed it. Maureen and Kyle were no longer in the mood for a swim, so we walked home together. Maureen said, "How is it you get tossed from the party when Duffy was causing all the trouble?" "I don't know." "And those savages, why'd you grab my arm?" Kyle asked. "Because we're not going at it with them at a party. There'll be time for that later." "No doubt. They wake up looking for trouble," I said. "Vinnie, what the hell? You had to be down there 5 minutes," Maureen said. "Who can hold their breath that long? A whale?" Kyle added. "You guys, I've never told anyone this before because it never came up, but I had this gift, I guess you'd call it. My parents think I'm like a fish. I never had a swimming lesson in my life, but I could swim the first time I hit the water. Mom and Dad would take me to Lake Michigan and I just swam away. They went nuts at first, but then they realized how good I was at swimming. The crazy thing about all of it was I could stay down for a long time. I thought all kids could until I grew up and realized I'm different from the others that way. When McDufferton grabbed me, I knew I was going to be okay." "Then why did you struggle so much?" Kyle asked. "Because I don't like him being humiliated, and I hate that jackass." I walked from their door And as I was about to say goodbye, the thunder rolled across the South Milwaukee summer sky, and lightning struck out across Lake Michigan. As I ran down the sidewalk, it started to rain. I'll see you guys later. Yeah, and maybe you can hold your breath in the rain, Hooligan, Maureen replied. The rain had stopped. I woke at 3 or so in the morning to a high-pitched scream that not only startled, but also scared me. It was like wailing that made me sad. It was coming from outside the window. Curious, I got out of bed and went to look. There, standing on the sidewalk, in a long gray hooded robe, was a woman, wailing and crying. As she screamed out, she seemed to be staring into the sky, and when her gaze fell upon me, these fluorescent green eyes felt like it pierced my soul. The next thing I knew, she was standing in my room. She was staring at my bed with a frown on her face as if judging the posters on my wall. I wasted no time as I ran and jumped into my bed and grabbed my covers for comfort and pulled them over my head. You hooligans were always cowards. I peeked out at her from under my covers. Well, you would be too if someone just appeared in your room in the middle of the night. She pulled her hood down, and I expected it to be an old crone from the sound of her keening in the street, but she was beautiful. Flowing red hair, fair skin, long red fingernails, but her eyes were crazy, like they could see right through to my very soul, and she was angry. I imagined her reaching into my chest and pulling out my heart. Who are you? You don't know. If I did, would I ask? You mean those tossers you call ancestors didn't tell you about me? No, not the full shilling knows. What? Shut your gob, boyo, and listen up. Ask your da or your granda who I am, and they'll tell you any rugger bugger would know me by sight. And no, I'm not to be messed with. You or yours have something of mine, and I want you back. And if you think being exiled from Ireland was bad, you haven't been paying attention. Exiled from Ireland? I've never been, and never will if I don't get what's mine back. How do I give back what I never took? Come to think of it, I don't even know what the heck's been taken. Not you, but yours, boy. Absconded with my crystal, and I want it back. I don't know anything about any crystal. Oh, you will, boyo. If I were you, I'd have a little sit down with your family. Get it back, the curse is lifted. Don't? You really don't want to know. The sun came streaming into my window, and I jumped up, sat on the side of my bed, and rubbed my eyes. What the absolute heck happened last night? That had to be a dream. No way I was talking to some nasty-ass ghost, was I? That afternoon, I went to the Quinlans. We sat in the patio in the shade of their large umbrella, and I told them about the dream. Kyle said matter-of-factly, like we talked about this sort of thing all the time. Sounds like a banshee. Could be Cleona, the banshee queen. Irish call it keening. Keening? Yeah, the screeching, crying, and screaming. They call it keening. How do you know all this shit? She's a psycho for Irish folklore. Don't get her started about grogotches or changelings, Maureen said. Kyle said, the Irish? I thought we were all Irish, I asked. We are by lineage, but the people of Ireland consider us Yanks. We're Americans, Irish Americans. We all get silly about our Irish heritage, being proud and all that. And the Irish appreciate it, but they don't consider us Irish. It's complicated. Okay, I get it. Anyway, like I was saying, the Irish believe that when someone from one of the great Irish clans is going to die, the Banshee will come keening as a sort of forewarning. Who are the clans? Well, the O'Neills, the O'Connors, the O'Briens, the O'Grady's, and the Kavanaghs. Who decided on them? Well, I'm not totally sure, so don't quote me on this, but I think they're descended from the High Kings of old. But now it gets a bit convoluted. What? Complicated. Because those families have married into other families in Ireland. I'm not sure if I'm related to any of those clans, but it sounded like she's pissed off about some crystal that was stolen from her, Maureen said, and it had nothing to do with warning anyone about a coming death. Wait a minute, you guys think this was real, not a dream? Dude, it was real. You need to do a little research into your family history. Sounds to me like someone in your family took this crystal from old Cleona, and that crazy hag wants it back, and you do not want a banshee, let alone the queen of the banshee, cursing your ass. You think life is hard now?